We're going to continue our look at the one another passages, and I think this one fits the theme for today anyway. It's not the normal or usual Easter sermon, but you'll see that it does apply to some of the things that make today special. When we think of Jesus and the coming of Jesus, we think of the prophecies in the Old Testament. We think of how God prepared the way through all the prophets throughout the centuries as they were beginning to give His people an insight into what Jesus was going to be like. They were slowly building a picture, a mental picture that these people could grasp, they could understand what the Savior was going to look like. But unfortunately, people were looking for something very different. They were looking for something that was very physical, and they weren't looking at the spiritual aspect. It's surprising that God would send someone to deliver the world that wouldn't have some kind of spiritual connection. It's surprising that the Jews did not anticipate what Jesus would be like. And God had prepared the way in so many ways, and that's where our lesson this morning comes in. God had prepared His people culturally to be accepting of not just their own people, and not just to look out for their own people. And He'd made all kinds of fail-safes that those within the community could never be cast out. They could never be left out. They could never be abandoned. There was a way in which God set up the system to protect everybody. And not only that, He made sure that His people were open to outsiders. In fact, the whole idea of the people of God was to be an example to the world of who God was. They were supposed to be the light that people would look at and say, well, that's from our Creator. That's what our Creator wants us to do. That's how He wants us to live. So Judaism was never this isolated nation that was supposed to just stick to itself and not interact with the rest of the world. And we can see that through the Old Testament, how God interacted with other nations. He even brought them in to discipline His own people. But He had prepared God's people to also accept the outsider, to invite the outsider in, the stranger. And that's where we get to this morning's lesson. John actually touches on this in John chapter 1. Probably the most read about passage of Scripture when it comes to the prophecies about Jesus, as the Jews were looking forward to Him coming. In John chapter 1, John says that He came to His own. He came to His own people, and His own people did not accept Him. He knocked on the door of His own people expecting to be welcomed in, and He was not. If there is an attribute, a quality that should define us as a people, it is this attribute: hospitality. I want you to think about Jesus on the cross today. It's interesting, I think, that God had set up the plan to get Jesus to the cross. It's just, to me, it's an amazing thing how Jesus was able to come at just the right time, how history was unfolding, that He could end up on a cross. What's amazing to me is we are used to seeing people in this position, and we understand what it means, right? We understand when somebody stands before us and holds their arms open. We understand what that means, right? That is a symbol that we should never forget about the cross. That Jesus opens up His arms to everyone. I think hospitality is a tough thing because we pick who we want to be hospitable to, don't we? We decide who we're going to invite in or who we are not going to invite in. But the cross tells us we don't have that choice. If we're going to be like Jesus, if He opens up His arms to the whole world, we have to find a way to do the same. We have to find a way to be hospitable to the whole world. I think this defines the nature of our God. If people would just believe, they are welcome. If people come to us and they ask for help, if they believe that we can offer help, which we should, then we must. So from 1 Peter chapter 4 and verse 9, Peter says, offer hospitality to one another without grumbling. And I want us to break down this passage. I think there are some things in here that I hope will open our minds up to what it means to really be hospitable. First it says offer. Offer hospitality to one another without grumbling. Offer means that I make the first step. I offer an invitation. Do we go around doing that? If you're proactive, it means you're looking for somebody to get closer to. You're looking for somebody to offer help to. Really, we should not be the ones who are approached to help. We should be the ones that are offering help. It takes a very different perspective, doesn't it? It's great when somebody comes up to you and asks for help. That means they think that maybe you will be gracious enough, merciful enough, that you care enough that you would at least listen to what they have to say, and perhaps there might be a chance that you would offer them some help. But it's a very different thing for us to look around and to study those around us and to approach people and offer them help before they ask. I think it's very difficult for us today, especially in the 21st century. We live in a very fast-paced world, don't we? We also live in a very dangerous world. We live in a world where we don't know everybody, where we do have to interact with strangers. I don't know if you've ever been taken advantage of, but I'm sure if you've put yourself out there and you've offered to help somebody, chances are you've been taken advantage of. Right? You've been hurt. Somebody's done something horrible to you. I can remember as a child all the stories I'd hear of people that my parents and their friends offered help to and how they were treated. I think it's very easy for us to say, you know what, I am not going to help. I'm not going to look out anymore to see if I can get involved in other people's lives and actually offer my service. It's understandable. There are probably some times when you shouldn't do that. But I believe that this passage, Peter is trying to tell us to be looking out in our world to see what we can do. How can we make ourselves more valuable to the world? Perhaps that's why the world doesn't care for us much. Perhaps that's why our image is a little bit tarnished, because Christians don't offer help anymore. We're not going out there looking for people to help. Notice what Paul says in Romans 12 and 13. He says, share with God's people who are in need. And then he says, practice hospitality. We mustn't be potentially hospitable. We mustn't just be open people. We must be doing it. We must be doing it. If somebody has to ask, we've probably missed the opportunity, haven't we? How many times have you seen somebody perhaps at school or at work or a neighbor, and you've looked at them and you've seen something's not right? Something seems wrong. Question is, did you say something? Did you ask? Did you try to make a connection with that person? And that kind of tells you where you are. You're either in the mode of looking to help, or you're waiting to see if somebody will help. I think we need to be proactive people. I think people need to learn what Christianity is really about. The whole idea of the cross is that Jesus came for us and died for us first. God takes the first step. We need to take the first step. If we are God-like, if we are Christ-like, He takes the first step, we need to take the first step. And I know it's difficult. I know we put ourselves out there, we make ourselves vulnerable. Chances are, probably, most of the time, we're going to be taken advantage of, but that's okay. That's not why we do it. We do it because Jesus did it. We do it because God did it. We do it because we want to be like Him. I encourage you to think about your week and all the opportunities that will present themselves to you. Do you take the opportunity to really look around at people and at least ask? There's a lot of proud people that don't want your help, but that's okay. Ask anyway. There are a lot of angry people that don't want to hear you say what you have to say, but ask anyway. We need to change our image. We need to think of the cross and think of what Jesus did with those open arms. And we really need to realize that we need to be open to our world. The next part of the sentence, he says, hospitality. He uses the word hospitality. And if you notice, I've used the word guardian. We don't often think about somebody who is hospitable as a guardian. Now, if you go back into the Old Testament and we look at what it meant to be hospitable, we realize that it is this particular word, a guardian. You remember when the angels come to visit Lot in Sodom? Remember the story? Not humanity's finest hour. But what does Lot do? He offers the angels hospitality. Excuse me. He offers the angels safety. The word that is used there is the word that we often use for the love of strangers. Now, the fear of strangers, we've heard that word a lot lately, haven't we? Anyone know what xenophobia is? Sometimes Americans are considered to be xenophobic because we want to put a wall up around the country and keep strangers out. That's where this word comes from. Stranger, xenos. And then philos, the word for love or friendship. Friends of strangers, or the love of strangers. A stranger is somebody who is vulnerable. Somebody who is hurting and needs help, that you have noticed, that you reach out to, that you address and you say something to. That is not a position of strength that they're in. They're in a position of weakness. You're in the position of strength. And when you offer to help, you're offering to protect whatever it is that is wrong with them. You offer them security. Now, of course, at first, that may not be accepted. I would guess that probably all of us in this room have some things we don't want other people to know about ourselves. Because if they did, we'd become very vulnerable. And we know people will sometimes use that against us. And we don't like to be told that we are weak, that we are ill, or that we need help, or that we are vulnerable. We don't like people to know that we are. But if people know what we are trying to do, and they understand that we are trying to protect the person that we are approaching and not take advantage of them, maybe they'll let us in. Maybe they'll let us help. In Hebrews chapter 13 and 2, it says, do not forget to entertain, and that's this word right here, strangers. For by doing so, some people have entertained angels without knowing it. How many times have you interacted with people not realizing who they are? And then sometime later you find out something about them and there is a connection perhaps. And then you think to yourself, ooh, I'm glad I helped. I'm glad I offered. I'm so glad that I said something or did something because there was a connection. The funny thing is that all of us in this room are related. We don't often think about that, don't we? We all came from Adam and Eve, or at least the 8 souls that came off that boat. All of us in this room are related. But you know what? We sometimes don't care about those people who are very distant to us, do we? That's what the problem is. It's just that we're not close enough to the stranger that we meet. Remember when God approaches Cain, says, "Where is your brother?" And he asks the question of God, "Am I my brother's keeper?" And the answer is yes, you are your brother's keeper. More so than you think. You are your brother's guardian. If we obey God's principles, then we protect others. That's what the Ten Commandments are. It's protecting what is valuable. It's protecting what is worth a lot to us. And if you go down that list and think about what those Ten Commandments symbolize or stand for, is to protect what is valuable. And you'll remember on the bottom of the list there we get to murder and adultery, to theft, to coveting. All those are about protecting somebody else instead of taking advantage of them. We see where this comes from. Wouldn't it be terrible if you interacted with somebody and you were supposed to be a certain way, and then you found out later that it was a test, and you failed the test? But you know what? If you were looking to help others, and if you really cared, and you were looking out for their best interests, you would do it all the time. You would pass the test every time. Now I can tell you, I think it's easier than we think it is. Because I tell you what, most people are going to reject you. You're going to offer, and you're going to care, and you're going to want to help, but they will reject you. That'll happen 9 out of 10 times. But we can't stop doing it. We can't stop letting people know that Christians protect other people. Could you imagine that? Could you imagine if people knew what we were like? You know, this word, this idea of showing hospitality is a very interesting word in the Old Testament. We have an example today. Remember the movie Lone Survivor? Based on a true story about a soldier who gets basically left alone after several of his other men are killed in combat, and a tribal leader takes him in. You remember? And the particular tribe that he was taken in by operated by a very interesting set of rules. Now, some say that that's kind of interesting that they have those rules, that they've come up with them on their own, but they're really not. They're biblical rules. And that is where this word comes from. It is sad to me that Christians aren't known that way. This is something we should be known for. You know what's interesting about the movie is, what we don't realize really in the movie, is that the petty officer that is protected by this tribe is actually his enemy. They are enemies. But because of this principle of taking in the stranger and helping the stranger, once he makes that offer, he cannot rescind it. And you'll remember in the movie, in the scene where he's down by the river and he's drinking the water, and the stranger has to decide whether he's going to turn him in or not, and then he says, "No, I'll help." And once he says that, he's done. He's bound to help the soldier. Maybe that's why we don't go around making too many offers, right? Because once we make the offer, we're bound to protect who it is we've offered the help to. Maybe that's why we keep it so close. Maybe that's why we keep those things that are ours, and we keep other people out of them. Today, that's a very common teaching, isn't it? When we start asking people things about their lives, you know what they turn around and tell us? It's my business. Stay out of my business. The truth is, what God is saying is, everybody else's business is your business. That's what this passage is saying. Their business is your business. The problem is in the past, those poor people have seen the worst of humanity, haven't they? That's why they tell us, keep out of their business. When people ask, what is church work like? What is preaching like? What is youth ministry like? It's the business of people. That's what it is. And if you flip that around, it's about people's business. That's what it's about. All of us in here need to be about other people's business. Could you imagine a world where everybody protected everybody else? What kind of world would that be like? Nothing like the one we live in right now. But we can start that. This is what Peter is trying to tell us to do, that we should be about true hospitality. It means not just accepting the people we like or want to accept, but accepting the people we don't like, the people we don't want, the strangers. And then notice he makes it even more difficult. Not that we should offer every time, not that we should really care and protect others, but then he says this. He says, without grumbling. Without grumbling. Now the opposite of that is cheerful. But that word grumbling is a very interesting word. That is the same word that is used of God's people in the desert when they grumbled against God. When they translated the Hebrew into the Greek, they used the same word there for grumble. Now, how many times do we grumble when we have to help somebody else? But I want to stop you right there. Before you think about all the grumbling, I want you to think about what the result was for God's people when they grumbled. Two generations were left dead in the desert. I don't know about you, but if you imagine the desert, it's a terrible place to bury a body. When the wind blows enough, eventually the body is exposed. I wonder how many travelers traveled through that desert and came across hundreds of thousands of Israelite bones in the desert. And I wonder if they asked, how did they end up here? What made this happen? Well, it's because they grumbled. We can't grumble. Look at what Paul says in Romans chapter 12 and verse 8, speaking about all the gifts and the talents that we have in the church and what we should be doing. And towards the end he says in verse 8, if it is showing mercy, let him do it cheerfully. At the very least, we should be about mercy. We shouldn't do it begrudgingly. Do I have to do this? I don't want to do this. I get this look on my face like it's some kind of chore, like some kind of effort, and I don't really want to be there. Peter is telling us it's not enough just to make the offer. It's not enough to actually go through the act. You have to enjoy it. Sometimes I'll do tasks that I don't like. Do you do this? Sometimes I'll do tasks and I'll tell myself while I got this look on my face, I'm really enjoying myself. This is a whole lot of fun. Not. But I keep trying to tell myself, no, I need to be enjoying this. It needs to be done. And then something goes wrong, like the packet breaks and whatever it is falls on the ground, or the tool you're using breaks and you got to go get another one. And it's like, can it get any worse? Yes, it can. It does. It will. Until you smile, it's going to get worse. And I'm thinking, as it's falling apart, I'm just thinking, God's going, I'll teach him another lesson, bam. I'll teach him another lesson, bam. It's a hard thing to offer the help, to do it right, and then to enjoy it when you don't. But that's what the challenge of being a Christian is. Jesus goes to the cross begrudgingly because he didn't see the value in it. He didn't think it was important. He didn't think you were important. I think when we go to our cross, when we carry our cross every day, the challenge would be to do it with a smile. Can you imagine what the world would know about Christians if they look at us and see us doing something nobody wants to do? when there is really, in human terms, no glory in it, and we've got a big smile on our face and we can't wait for the next one? What does that tell the world about us? And maybe it goes back to the first part of this passage. Maybe when we make the offers in the future, people are going to say, you know what, I want you to help. You're the kind of person I want to help. I want you involved in my life. I want you to be involved in my business because I know you're going to do it the right way. And you're going to enjoy doing it no matter how difficult it is. Could you imagine if that's what the world saw in us? So God's people, if we are God's people, then we want to help others. We want to offer and extend ourselves to others. We don't just want to do it for ourselves, we want to do it for them. So we're looking out for them. We want what's best for them. This is not about me, this is about you. And finally, we need to find a way to enjoy it. We need to be happy. We need to be glad that we can serve, even if it's the jobs nobody else wants to do. I think that's when people will begin to understand what Christianity is really about. I think people have difficulty understanding the cross because they don't see it in us. They don't see us carrying their cross. They don't see us carrying other people's burdens. There's no proof. Let's offer them the proof. Let's go into this week looking for someone to help. Doing it for nothing but their benefit. And enjoying it. And asking if we can do it again. Wouldn't that be great?